Welcome to Making Trade Inclusive for All Americans podcast. I'm your host, Derick Holt, a partner in Wiley's International Trade Practice Group. Join us as we discuss the intersectionality between trade policy, race, and making the benefits of trade accessible to all Americans. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Eugene Laney Jr. Please say the doctor. He's the president and CEO of the American Associations of Exporters and Importers, a premier trade organization that represents the interests of American companies engaged in international trade. The organization provides various services, support, and advocacy efforts aimed at helping its members navigate the complexities of international trade and customs regimes. Dr. Laney has over 25 years of experience working in governmental affairs and sits on the board of the National Foreign Trade Council. He also serves on the Trade Advisory Group for the Council of Americas and the Trade Committee Chair for the Express Association of America. As the CEO and president of AAEI, Dr. Laney advocates for fair international trade policy on behalf of American businesses to Congress, federal agencies, and international trade organizations. Welcome, Dr. Laney, to Wiley Trade Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have another bison on here. I think I'm finding every single bison that's in international trade and bringing them on the show. So let's just kind of talk about your path. Prior to AAEI, you spent several decades immersed in governmental relations. Whether it's at DHL, the National Business Travel Association, or even when you were an editor at the Congressional Quarterly back in the 90s. How have these roles changed or shaped your professional journey? And at which point did you begin to delve deeper into international governmental affairs?
Yeah, so it all started like, any graduating college student. I wanted to try to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And so I had the choice of going to law school or getting my Ph.D. And so I had a professor at Florida A&M who encouraged me to get my Ph.D. And so one of the things I wanted to do was find a place that I could learn as much about public policy as possible. And so I had an opportunity to go to Congressional Quarterly, spend some time there learning about the public policy process. And then the second piece, I wanted to learn about a particular industry and transportation. Everyone loves transportation and travel. So I had the opportunity to go to the National Business Travel Association, and then something crazy like 9/11 occurred, which meant that I had to be very much involved in, helping stand up the TSA, figuring out how we create a Department of Homeland Security. And then we also had issues like passenger rights questions and delays. And so it was a great opportunity then. But at that point, I knew that I loved transportation, but I wanted to work for a company. And DHL is one of the premier logistics companies in the world. It represents such a diverse group. It started off by 3 hippies in San Francisco deciding that they wanted to send paperwork to Hawaii. And since then, it grew into an international company. So I wanted to work there. I went to DHL. And as I worked there, I became so in love with helping small and medium-sized businesses. I worked with the Department of Commerce to stand up DHL's first strategic partnership, which basically went in and helped companies, startups figure out how to grow their business global. And I loved it so much that some of the customers that I worked with had an opportunity. They were on boards for the American Association of Exporters and Importers, the National Foreign Trade Council. So I knew that I wanted to get back into the association world because I loved working there so much. And so the opportunity opened up for AAEI, and that was a perfect way for me to then get in there and really directly impact, how companies are growing globally.
Wow. So you said you were working at DHL, right? Working at AAEI marked the transition for you, right? You went from advocating for the interests of a singular company to advocating for the interests of a broad industry. How have you managed this transition, and how do you approach topics where there may not be a unified stance within the industry?
Yeah, I think that what I learned from DHL, because we represent such a diverse group of different companies, sometimes they would be competitors, is that DHL would sort of act as a medium, a way to bring those issues together, a forum to have both sides express their positions. And I think at the end of the day, competitors, that's all they want. They want to know how to express their position. You may not agree on every issue, but if there's a forum to express your views, then I think that's what people want. And so what we've done at AAEI, there are some issues that we can't see eye to eye, or companies may not be aligned with. But what we do is we try to create an opportunity to get those voices out, so then the public can make the decision on what's right or wrong, or then the stakeholders or legislators can decide what's right or what's the right fit. But just providing that forum for that expression is what I learned through that whole process.
Well, can we just back up for a minute? Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on your role and then the role that AAEI plays for U.S. exporters and importers?
Yeah, so AAEI was founded in 1921. President Harding gathered together U.S. importers and exporters to figure out how to grow U.S. exports. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, General Motors was a puppy. Boeing was making furniture. So you had all these companies that that were trying to figure out how to grow up. And mm-hmm. President Harding brought all these companies together and basically figured out how to remove the barriers and grow businesses globally, how to open up markets, how to diversify, the products that the U.S. is serving. And so over the years, AEI has served that purpose as one, advocating for those companies. And then the other part is then providing the education so that SME or that entrepreneur, or even that company that's losing money on one industry that wants to move to another industry, can sort of learn how to grow their business. And then the other big piece is the networking. We have our annual conference, which is coming up in June 10th to the 12th in Fort Lauderdale. It's our 103rd conference, so it's where companies come together, stakeholders, mm-hmm. legislators, government people, and we even have a lot of foreign dignitaries that come just to learn what are the trade trends and how they can learn more how to make change within the international community.
Okay. Well, in recent years, supply chain concerns have prompted discussions on how to improve U.S. import and export regimes. Does your work at AAEI provide any insight on how to reliably secure America's supply chains?
Yes, we've been very much involved in that discussion. A lot of it, what we've learned, centered down to transparency and cooperation around the sharing of data. A lot of what happened with the port congestion in LA and Long Beach and other had everything to do with not knowing when your container was going to get there, not then telling the next actor to grab that container and move forward. The inability of actors to say, okay, we don't have enough information about this container, it's going to be held, and then giving that information to the railroads or to that final distribution center. So a lot of it is communication and then transparency on what are the rules. And so a lot of things we fought for were just to create sort of like a shipper's bill of rights that outlines transparent rules and regulations on how containers move once they get here and then when they move on to the center part of the country.
Okay, all right. I'm going to move on to one thing that it's kind of the topic of today, right? Mm-hmm. So the Biden administration, as shown by USTR's recent public comment period on advancing inclusive worker trade policy, has brought DEI issues to the forefront of trade policy. Do you think the government is likely to sustain this focus going forward? And how has this impacted the messaging and the work of your organization?
Yeah, so I think it's been good that it's brought to sort of as a priority level. You can go back at least, every administration has attempted to go after underserved and rural communities. I think now that it's brought up to a priority, more resources are drawn towards it. I was at a National Association District Export Council meeting last week where a Biden official was talking about how to get more offices in those rural and underserved communities. They're setting up offices in South Dakota. They're setting up offices at HBCUs. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the missing piece, I think, that wasn't there over the years, is that if I'm ABC and company, or if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to know how to grow my business globally, I'm selling locally, how can I grow my business globally? I have to travel to a major city, or I have to go somewhere to get that education. So how can I just go next door to HBCU or go next door to an office that's in South Dakota or in Oklahoma and get that education? That'll help me grow my business. I always like to tell a story of the gentleman I met in North Carolina. He said he had the world's greatest barbecue sauce. Mm-hmm. And so he was an African American, and he said, I have the world's greatest barbecue sauce, but I don't know how to sell it globally. And so he connected with FedEx at the time. He connected with the Department of Commerce, and now he's selling his barbecue sauce in Korea and all across the globe. Wow. He's added his family to his business. So that's an example of how, if you get that education, best practices, then you can grow your business and how it's directly impacted an underserved community.
Wow, wow. That is one of the things that when you talk about, trying to export and grow your business, how do you get that information to people? And what you're saying is that now they're bringing the information to the constituents.
And that's a big difference. I mean, before you would have to pay to go on a trade mission to Vietnam. You would have to pay to go to a trade mission. If you're even, people don't realize that people are still doing business in China. So if you want to go, learn more about China, you have to go on a trade mission. But now bringing that information directly to the entrepreneur, directly to that business, will help them figure out how to grow their business. And most people aren't aware that they're already an international company. I bring up stories, the funny thing is Tina Turner learned that her biggest business was in Europe. She was an international trader. She didn't realize her business wasn't here in the United States, it was in Europe. And so many, whether you're in entertainment, whether you're in e-commerce, you're in the service industry, you're an engineer, architect, you may be an international trader and not aware of that. And if you're doing business in Mexico, you can also do business in Guatemala or Canada. Or if you're doing business in Vietnam, you can do business in Malaysia and Indonesia. And I don't think some companies are aware of that, and that's part of that education process.
So when you're advocating on the Hill, drawing connections to your constituent companies and individuals key. Can you give us an example of how you would explain to an ordinary consumer the impact of what you're advocating for, such as modernizing import and export regimes or duty savings programs? How do you explain that to an ordinary consumer?
Yeah, so I use the barbecue sauce story. I use the other one that's very popular is a story. It's a DHL story. So there, in Cambodia, there's a lot of poverty, and so there was a woman who would collect a lot of the shells that was there from Vietnam, collected the shell, and she made jewelry, and she would just make jewelry for her community. And so she ran into a DHL courier, and the DHL courier said, "Have you ever thought about just selling this globally? You have beautiful jewelry. We can help you set up your website. You can use DHL to sell it in 220 countries." So she started manufacturing the jewelry. She only hired women. So she had women within her village make the jewelry, and now she's selling in 220 different countries. And so that's an example of how you can grow your business if you have the right information. And then she's taking advantage, of course, of de minimis, because a lot of the jewelry is under $800 or under $200 in other countries.
Okay. So that also comes to this next question that I wanted to bring up, because AAEI has several committees and working groups, covering issues from forced labor to healthcare to trade policy. Has your organization considered forming a group that focuses on minorities, women, veteran-owned businesses, especially since traditional trade policy has disproportionately affected Black and brown Americans?
Yes, one of the unique things we did last year is that we partnered with the Women in International Trade. And so we gave them their own panel. And so we basically said we want to bring forward all of the stars that are out there advancing trade. And then we also tried to make sure that we created diverse panels at our conference, because our conference is sort of like the showcase of all the key players in international trade. And so we tried to make sure we have diverse panels that sort of communicate how trade is impacting different communities, their vision of trade. And so we've taken that approach. But I think the biggest impact that we've had is just the whole idea of market access. And that's the piece that's missing from the Biden administration's trade agenda. It's no more, we moved away from market access. So if I'm that Cambodian, or if I'm that the guy who wants to sell barbecue sauce, if there's no market access into those countries, I can't sell there, which means that I'm stuck here selling in the United States. 95% of all consumers are outside of the U.S. If I want to grow globally, I have to sell outside of the U.S. And the only way you can do that is through market access. So I think that's the piece that we're always selling when we sit down with Korea or Vietnam. We have U.S. small and medium-sized business, many of which are underserved and rural community companies that have the ability to sell outside of the United States, come get their products.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about how DEI makes its way into internal policy discussions and the advocacy work of AAEI?
Yeah, so we had a chair. Our previous chair was a woman, and she was very adamant to make sure that we would do everything we could to create a diverse community. And so she wanted to look at the board, she wanted to look at our committee chairs, she wanted to look at our agenda. So she was very front in trying to do that. And so now we have a new chair and we have a co-chair from General Mills, and she has that same position, the idea of how can we figure out to create diverse voices, because that's what trade inherently is inclusive in the sense that you're trying to grow markets, you're trying to go global, you're looking at different cultures. So how do we present that AEI in that way, as well as present our advocacy, networking, and education in that same manner?
Okay. We talked a little bit about de minimis, but I want to get back into it. As the Trade Committee Chair of the Express Association of America, you advocate on behalf of e-commerce and logistics companies for meaningful de minimis levels for low-value shipments. Do you have any insights on how these levels impact minority-owned small businesses or the diverse American consumer?
Yeah, so when I was at DHL, I was the chair of the of the Trade Committee and even NFTC. I want to put that out there so I don't get in trouble with those two groups. But I get back to the example of there's so many entrepreneurs that are in the e-commerce business. I don't think, and they don't again realize how they benefit from de minimis. So, for example, we had a company when I was at DHL that learned that there was synergy between the hip hop community and the beachgoers, the beach community. So he figured out how to sell in Australia. And the only way he was able to sell to Australia is through de minimis, because he was able to source the t-shirts that he needed or the fabric that he needed from other places. He then branded it in a certain way and he sold it off to Australia. So Australia has a very great de minimis level. US has a great de minimis level. So he's done very well in selling those products via e-commerce. So it's those entrepreneurs that have leveraged e-commerce, and they don't even realize that they're taking advantage of this de minimis provision to allow them to reduce their costs. But the biggest piece of de minimis, and not getting stuck on de minimis itself, but it's just reducing trade barriers. We try to push what we call the velocity of trade, the idea of having trade move without paper, documentation, having to get additional resources, because when you're an entrepreneur, you're the CEO, you're the COO, you're moving boxes, you're doing everything.
You're doing everything.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you don't want to get caught up in trying to figure out how to have additional documentation, how to have a new system that tracks, how you classify goods. You want to move goods as quickly as possible. So, with that in mind, a lot of entrepreneurs are taking advantage of de minimis, but they're not aware of it, and it's helping reduce their costs. And I know there's concerns about, security and all this. So AEI has been working with with CBP and DHS and other agencies to figure out how we can provide more data in advance, so that CBP and others can sort of make those risk assessments before the goods get here.
Okay. So I have a couple more questions on DEI. What advice would you give the organizations looking to integrate DEI considerations into their global trade strategies and policies?
Yeah, the case study approach is what I would say is that I think a lot of times when someone presents DEI, they're intimidated by the phrase or the term in some circles, and I think to alleviate whatever nervousness they have or concern of how their board's going to feel about it or how outside parties, is just provide the case studies. That's why I talk about the barbecue sauce, all the Cambodian. There's so many stories of how DEI has helped individual businesses, and then it's just not that business. You figure, the barbecue sauce person helped FedEx business. The majority of FedEx's couriers are African American or Asian or Latino, and then so you have all these different webs that are connected to that business that's growing, that's then creating additional jobs in the different communities. So I think telling more case studies, more stories of the success of it, I think paints a picture that I think alleviates some concerns that in boardrooms and other places.
Okay. If you're a U.S. importer or exporter interested in fair international trade, how do you get involved with AAEI?
Yeah, well, so the big thing is to come to our conference. That's what I always say. So
come to the conference.
Is
when is it?
10th through the 12th in Fort Lauderdale. Okay. So it's a great opportunity for you to learn, some of the best practices of trade compliance. Most of our members are trade compliance executives. You can learn about all the new security regulations. But more importantly, you have an opportunity to network with folks who have grown businesses, for folks that are trying to learn how to grow their business. And so it's a great opportunity to learn from there. And then, of course, we have everything from our road shows where we have benchmarking where companies come together in the room and they talk about what keeps them up at night and they share best practices. And then we're going to launch some 201 and 101 courses to help companies. And the other thing that we do, AAEI, we partner with the District Export Council. So I travel a lot to Louisiana. I just came back from the College of Charleston, where we try to interact with communities to figure out how to help those entrepreneurs learn more about trade compliance and international trade and growing their business.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Laney, for sharing your insights and just all your perspectives. The work that you're doing is uplifting American businesses, and I am so excited to continue working with you. Thank you for joining the podcast, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
All right, thank you.
All right, take care.